Get ready because the White House just dropped a real bombshell. Joe Biden, himself, who promised safety and justice to the American people, just commuted federal death sentences. Yes, that's exactly what you heard. And how does this impact life? Come with me and understand in this video right now.
As the president has announced plans to spare the lives of nearly all federal death row inmates just days before Christmas and 28 days before leaving office. 37 of the 40 prisoners on federal death row, including several who committed murders behind bars, will now serve life without parole. NewsNation's Tom Dempsey has the latest from the White House this morning. Tom, some are viewing this move as a parting shot at the Trump administration.
Absolutely. There might be some evidence of that. Good morning from the White House, Nick. Look, just a short time ago, President Joe Biden publicly announcing that the lives of almost all federal death row inmates will be spared. Instead, they will see life sentences without the possibility of parole. But like you said, this comes less than a month before President Biden is expected to will be leaving office in January. And this could hurt those plans by President-elect Donald Trump to potentially expand the use of the federal death penalty. And making this announcement, President Biden called out concerns over President-elect Trump possibly ending a moratorium on executions and expanding the use of the federal death penalty to include drug smugglers and human traffickers. In a statement this morning, President Biden writing, quote, "Make no mistake, I condemn these murderers, grieve for the victims of their despicable acts, and ache for all the families who have suffered unimaginable and irreparable loss." He goes on to say, though, but guided by my conscience and by my experience, I am more convinced than ever that we must stop the use of the death penalty at the federal level. And of course, the timing of all this, earlier this month, President Biden pardoning his son Hunter in the midst of convictions and legal troubles against his son. And he's also issued over 36 pardons and almost 1,500 commutations. So a very busy month for these types of announcements from President Biden, Nick.
But Tom, what do we know about the inmates who are being spared? And maybe more importantly, the 3 who still face the death penalty?
Yeah, so there's 40 people on the federal death row list right now, and these involve cases of people murdering fellow inmates in some cases, potentially murdering someone during an armed robbery. But we want to dive into some of the other cases as well. One of the oldest cases, it dates back to 1993, and it involves Richard Tipton and James Roan Jr., both charged in a series of drug-related killings in Richmond, Virginia, as well as Daniel Troya and Ricardo Sanchez, who were sentenced to death back in 2009 for their involvement in a drug-related murder of a family of 4. Including a 4-year-old and a 3-year-old boy. Now, like I said, there's 40 people on that federal death row list. 3 people will not be affected by these commutations, and they will still face the possibility of being put to death. We're talking about Dylan Roof, who is charged in connection to that Charleston, South Carolina church shooting. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev charged in connection to that Boston Marathon bombing, and James Bowers, Robert Bowers, charged in connection to the Tree of Life synagogue shooting from years ago, Nick.
Well, Tom, those are definitely some high-profile cases. Tom Dempsey, thank you so much.
Biden, who signed the order commuting most federal death sentences, just ignored the opinion of the American people, right? He not only ignored the opinion of the majority of the American people who support the death penalty for extreme cases, but also opened the door to a dangerous precedent. Like, for example, justifying mass murderers, terrorists, criminals, and much more. Yeah, but here's the cherry on top. All of this while public safety is plummeting. And do you think this is bad? I assure you it can get worse. Just listen to what Biden is going to say.
Let's bring in former White House official for President George W. Bush, Ashley Davis. Ashley, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well, Ashley, but this has definitely caused a lot of controversy because not everyone is pleased with the move that President Biden is making.
Absolutely. And I do think that this is something that's very personal to President Biden. Obviously, he is very religious, and this is something that he's actually talked to the Pope about. The Pope has spoken to him about. I think the reason that this has been 100% more in the forefront is because of what he did in pardoning his son. But what concerns me, and there's a lot of emotions around this issue, and so I respect and understand both sides in general of the death penalty and an eye for an eye, so to speak. But what concerns me the most, I would say, is undermining the actual judicial system, the federal judicial system and the court. So he's really overturning what the intent was for the courts. And so does this weaken the courts more than anything else, taking out the emotion of the issue?
And Ashley, some of these were actually adjudicated with a jury of their peers. It almost strips them of their agency as well.
Absolutely. And so I do think this is going to continue to be a very controversial issue for him, but I'm not an expert on President Biden, but I do have to say that this, again, is something that's very, very personal to him from a religious point of view. So,
Ashley, do you believe that this was a decision easier to make, seeing how Democrats will not hold the White House next term and that he is not doing another term as president? Is this a move that was easier to make? Can he make this move without the absence of politics in the back of his mind?
no, I think he knows exactly, but I also think that he has a different frame of mind since what happened right before the election with him getting pushed out in regards to his age and some of the sicknesses that he has. So I think even what he did with his own son, I mean, obviously that was going to be something that was very controversial, but I think he's thinking, I don't have that much time left on this earth, and so I have a couple more weeks of power, a couple more days of power at this point, and so I'm going to do what I want to do and what I believe in and suffer the consequences. Obviously, there is a huge, my old boss, President Bush, used to say, let history determine how you do as president. And so I think that that's something that, and obviously people like George Bush now than when they did it in 2008.
That, and we've talked about, it seems like the romance.
Biden, I'm sure he's thinking the same way.
And we've talked about the relationship between he and Michelle Obama with the mints and candies back and forth at different events as well there.
Oh, yeah, they're still very close. So I think it's a great relationship, which is nice.
Ashley, I do want to shift subjects here for a second and talk about President Trump, because over the weekend he also made headlines suggesting that the U.S. could reclaim control of the Panama Canal, also posting that this is in America's national security interest to purchase Greenland. What do you make of this? Is he serious, or are these just ideas, some kind of tactics before he gets into office?
You never quite know, but I do think he's serious about Greenland. I was reading something again this morning about this. I mean, obviously that's because of the strategic location of where it is. And so we could put significant amount of our military presence there to protect the country before anything reaches our country. So it sounds like kind of crazy from just a talking point, but if you look into the details a little bit, there is some strategic sense. I think in regards to the Panama Canal, obviously this has been an issue for decades. I also think because of what's happening right now in the Red Sea and other places in regards to our ships having to go around the Horn of Africa to deliver goods, that he's kind of making this threat, which you've seen several times before he's even been sworn in regards to putting a marker down of coming to the table and negotiating with him when he becomes president. You saw it obviously with the tariffs with Mexico, you saw it with Canada. So I think this is a little bit of his negotiating tactics, but we'll see.
Oh, we definitely will see, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Supporters of the measure say it's humanitarian, right? But let's get to the reality. While Biden saves the lives of criminals, the family and the victims are left forgotten, right? Of course not. While Biden saves the lives of criminals and spares them, victims and their families are left forgotten. And do you think anyone is worried about this or asking if they need anything? Did anyone ask what these mothers, these fathers, the children, or even the victims feel? Of course not, right? And do you know who's celebrating this decision? The radical progressive left.
President Joe Biden announced today that he will be commuting the sentences of most of the 40 inmates on federal death row. Biden will be changing the death sentences to life without parole to all but 3 inmates, the exceptions being the Boston bomber and the 2 men responsible for the mass shootings at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh and the church in Charleston, South Carolina. Advocates fighting against the death penalty, including Pope Francis, had been urging President Biden to grant the commutations before Donald Trump, who is pro-capital punishment, takes over in January. Biden said in a statement, "Make no mistake, I condemn these murderers, grieve for the victims of their despicable acts, and ache for all the families who have suffered unimaginable and irreparable loss. I am more convinced than ever that we must stop the use of the death penalty at the federal level. In good conscience, I cannot stand back and let a new administration resume executions that I halted." Joining us now is the president and CEO of the NAACP, Derek Johnson. The organization has been advocating for the Biden administration to commute the sentences of even more people in prison, especially those incarcerated under the war on drugs. So Derek, what do you make of this move? Perhaps not surprising, particularly after the Pope weighed in, but what do you make of it?
Well, we commend the president for this extraordinary act. The clemency and pardon powers of the president is unmatched. And it's good to see that he's using the moral authority of his faith to do what's right. You think about those who are on death row. Over 55% of those individuals are people of color, African Americans and Latinos and others. In fact, for every 8 people who are killed, 1 person later is found to be exonerated. So we are encouraging the president to continue on this moral path to ensure that the disparities that we see in the system that has been proven is addressed through the clemency process. There are individuals that should be pardoned. They are productive citizens. And this is the type of legacy that we will want to see any president go out on. A legacy of helping people recognizing disparities and addressing moral inequities.
The traditional media, of course, right? He argues that the death penalty is inhumane and that the system is flawed. But what about the terrorist acts and the murderers who destroyed hundreds of lives? If the system is flawed, why not work to improve it instead of sweeping all this dirt under the rug? Yeah, but it doesn't stop here. Find out one of the names of those benefiting from this decision, and then you'll really be shocked.
Vlad, good to see you. President Biden already had a moratorium in place for federal death sentences on crimes other than terrorism and hate crimes, and he's personally opposed to the death penalty, so perhaps this isn't that surprising. But those seeing their sentences commuted include Anthony Battle, sentenced to death in 1997 for killing a prison guard, Brandon Council, sentenced in 2019 for killing 2 bank employees while robbing that bank, and Kaboni Savage, sentenced in 2013 for killing 12 people in connection with a drug enterprise. Most of the others were awaiting sentencing in crimes related to the killing of fellow prisoners, or witnesses to crimes, or of prison guards, or for drug-related crimes. But 3 of the 40 on death row will remain there for committing well-known crimes. They are Robert Bowers, sentenced to death last year for the mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Dylan Roof, sentenced in 2017 for killing 9 at the Mother Emanuel Baptist Church in Charleston, South Carolina, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, convicted in 2015 for carrying out the Boston Marathon bombing that killed 3 and for shooting and killing a police officer just days later. In a statement this morning about the commutations, the president says he condemns these murderers and, quote, grieves for the victims of their despicable acts. He added he's, quote, more convinced than ever that we must stop the use of the death penalty at the federal level. In good conscience, he adds, I cannot stand back and let a new administration resume executions that I halted. His announcement comes just 4 weeks before President-elect Trump is set to take office, and he surely will have reaction to this throughout.
And among those benefiting are those convicted of brutal murders. 2 acts of terror. That's right, folks. It's shocking. And these are not mistakes of the system, no. They are the main criminals that this nation has ever seen. And now they have the opportunity to live normally, while the victims will never get their lives back. And what about their families? How do they fare? The question remains, Biden, do you think this is fair? And if you really think this is indeed already bad, get ready to see what's coming next.